we've had days like that this week. And I know that the other day, when I was here at the office and I decided that I wanted to enjoy this nice weather for lunch and have a change of pace. And so I got up out of the office and I walked down up the street, actually over the front street, began walking over. I was headed to the Bill Street Landing. I was going to eat there at the restaurant that's there on the river. And as I was walking along, I noticed the construction that they were doing. Construction on, there's some condominiums that they're building, there's a couple of businesses that they're putting up and all of that. And so I noticed the construction on the way there. And I thought about how this month we are using the theme for the month. If you build it in consciousness, it will come. And so as I was kind of playing with those ideas and playing with the ideas of the buildings that they were working on, another thought occurred to me, and that is that when those buildings are under the process of construction and when they are complete, they have to also go through a process of inspection. A process of inspection. And so as I continued to walk along and I was really searching for and playing with ideas for today's message, I thought about the fact, what if our consciousness was like a building? Because we said if we build it in consciousness, it will come. What if our consciousness were in one way very much like a building? And that, you know, if our thoughts create things and everything begins first in thought before it's actually created in reality, before it manifests. And then I started playing again with that idea, and the idea for the message came up in the form of this question, and that is, would you pass inspection? Would you pass inspection? Would your consciousness pass inspection? And I don't say this in a way to try to be judgmental or put anybody on the spot or anything like that, but my question is sincere. Would your consciousness pass inspection? And Mike here is in construction and all of that, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I happen to think that, because I was trying to be, really conscientious about it, so when I came back to my office, I searched the Oracle of Google, and I pulled up a sample construction inspection checklist. And it had all these questions that an inspector might ask as they come to inspect the building. And so then I said, well, that's really a whole lot of questions, and I don't want to get into all of that. And so then I started categorizing them, and there were several questions or several categories, I think, that the questions in the inspection pointed to. And the first one would basically be summed up in asking the question, is it sound? Is it sound? Meaning, is it structurally complete? Is there structural integrity to that? And so I want to ask that question with regard to our consciousness. Is our consciousness sound? And I say it like this now. Now, again, I'm not judging anything or anybody, but is our consciousness sound? And what Emma Redding brought me back to that, when a few years ago, several years ago now, every time at a certain point in that year, I knew that it was science fair time. And my son Kenny, I didn't learn early enough, would always come to me close to the last minute to say, my science fair project is going to be due in a few days. And there was a friend of mine, a man, an older gentleman who was a retired science teacher, and I would always call him and say, well, this year's theme is, and can you give me some ideas on what to use for the science project? And so this particular time, I know it has something to do with water and all of that, and so we came up with the idea to experiment with whether changing the shape of things would affect how it reacted with water. So what we did was we thought of the idea, we would take a piece of clay, we take a bowl of water, we first make a ball so the idea was, well, if we hollow it out and then place it on the water, it should float. It should float, right? You think about a boat, what's a boat hole? Hollowed out. You think about a canoe, it's hollowed out. Even we have a term for it when Native Americans take a tree and they scoop it out, it's called a dugout. So I was thinking about all of that. That was great. So, you know, we were going to write up the project and everything. And it's happened every year that my son would go to bed before I did. And I'm still up working on this project. Then he'd always come home and say, I got an A. I said, no, I got an A. You got sleep. But anyway, so as you know, we thought about that, we're writing those things up, and he had long gone to bed, and I finally got in bed. And I went to sleep, and after about 40 minutes though, I jumped straight up in the bed, and I realized that while we had written that part up about the experiment, about hollowing out the clay and everything, we had never tested it. So I had to go back downstairs, and I got the clay, and did like we said we were going to do in the description of everything, put it on the water, and guess what? It's sunk to the bottom. And it took some fashioning, some shaping, some things to do that. But what occurred to me at that point was that here I was operating more in theory rather than actually testing something, rather than actually putting it to the test. And what's often can happen in our teaching and in the way that we approach things, we can get caught up in, as the reading from Ernest Holmes earlier, abstract statements. I am, perfect expression of God. And we can say all of those things, the right things, and be spiritually, politically correct. But yet, if we never ever put those things to the test, as Ernest Holmes says, if we never ever bring heaven and earth together, if you will, then we're simply just uttering flowery sounding phrases without actually applying them to our lives. And one of the things that I know is that it can be possible to go through life and we can, on the one hand, talk about what it is that we believe and sound good in doing so, but the rest of the time in our lives, not actually apply our teaching and what we say we believe to everyday life. We say it when we get here, but we don't use it when it comes to the times that we really need it. And so that's when we find ourselves doing that. If we were to inspect ourselves, it's important to be aware of where our consciousness is, what our consciousness is all about, our awareness of things, and whether or not we apply what it is that we say that we believe to everyday life. The second thing that I think that happens with inspecting our consciousness and whether we'll pass inspection, the second category of questions on that checklist, I think, could be summed up in asking the question, is it safe? Is it safe? Because when we talk about safety, we live in a world, in particular in the United States, in which the media will do whatever it can to scare us and operate on fear. And we get caught up in fear. I read the other day where there was a family that found itself in the middle of controversy at their school because they happened to be from Liberia. And, Liberia being one of the countries in Africa where there are many, many cases of Ebola. And all of a sudden, when they found out that this family was from Liberia, people wanted to put the kids out of school. Now, you would think about that for a moment, and you would think that logic would prevail, because after all, here's a family that's from Liberia. Number one, the parents were actually from Liberia. The children were born in the United States. The parents had not actually been back to Liberia for 12 or 15 years and hadn't had any contact with any relatives that were from Liberia and all of that time to actually physically come here. But because they were from Liberia, we had some people who automatically made the connection, Ebola, Liberia, because every day, day in, day out, you turn on the television, particularly certain channels and all of that, and all you will see and hear about is how bad Ebola is, and all of that. And it's like somebody else said, that we can see people talking about things and doing things and making us get afraid and getting caught up in that. And we have to learn how to stand in our truth in that moment. We have to recognize and realize in those moments when people try to generate fear and motivate us based on fear, that ultimately there is nothing to fear. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't take concern for our safety and all of those things, but we recognize that only what we give our power to ultimately controls us. And if we don't give our power to the fear-mongering, if we don't give our power to all of the voices, the naysayers out of that, if we don't get caught up in that, we have taken control of our power. So it's important that when we are able to pass inspection and the question comes up, is it safe, that we understand that we don't operate out of a sense of fear. And as the Bible reminds us, God is not a God of fear, but of power and of a sound mind. That's what we do. And then I think the final question after, is it sound? Is it safe? Probably the next set of questions that we'll be concerned about in inspection, is it sustainable? Is it sustainable? Can it stand the test of time? And what I see by that when we talk about our consciousness and the way we think and our awareness, can it stand the test of time? Because what so often happens is that a lot of our daily thoughts, and I'm confessing this morning, a lot of our daily thoughts basically consist of arguments with other people, conflict, criticism, all things that don't contribute to a healthy, sustainable life. And the part of it is that most of our conflict with other people, where does it happen? But how sustainable is it? How sustainable is it to go through life constantly getting caught up in conflict and all of that and operating on that? And I think Frida helped us this morning with the centering moment where she had us to deal with that and talk about that. And I remember a quote that I read about the Buddha saying that resentment, because resentment plays a role in there, that resentment is like throwing a hot coal at somebody. Think about that for a moment. To even pick up the coal that's hot and burning to throw at somebody else, what do? You burn yourself. But we can find ourselves getting caught up in that, and it's not really sustainable. Because if we create our reality by our thoughts, and we're constantly in conflict, criticizing all of those other things, what does it do to us health-wise? What is stress ultimately? It's not what ultimately goes in us, but what's going on inside of us that ultimately is the cause of stress. And so we find ourselves moving through life, stressed out. Those things that or supposedly help us to de-stress actually can become more stressful. I mean, thinking about it, that our years ago we were told that we were going to come into a society where we would have less stress and more things automated and this and that and everything. And I bet you just as soon as we are finished, one of the first things that's going to happen, we're going to pull out our phones. We're going to look on them, and there's going to be one or two people in here. There's something on here that's going to cause some stress. A text from somebody, a post, from somebody, an email from somebody, you get the notice from the bank about the bank balance and all of those things and such. Stress. But the thing of it is that to have a sustainable life and sustainable consciousness ultimately means that we deal in truth. Truth is this. It's that we are God in expression. And we are powerful in and of ourselves. And one of the things I have to remind myself over and over and over again, that as I am God in expression, just how magnificent and how wonderful and how powerful I am. And the same is true about you. And I remember years ago when I was in elementary school, and there was a poster that was up in our classroom. didn't make no jump. And the thing of it is that ultimately, when I say whether or not I can pass inspection, it's standing with boldness in whatever it is that is happening, having a consciousness that indeed is stable, that indeed is sound, that indeed is safe, that indeed is sustainable. It means that I know who I am and you know who you are. And when we can do that, whatever life brings at us, we are ready and available to meet it and to go beyond it and to transcend it. It means that we have lives that are rich and lives that are joyful and lives that are meaningful and lives that are full of inspiration and lives that are encouraging. And even though things may happen, people may come and go, and situations may come and go, we are at a place and center where none of that ultimately affects us. We understand that none of that ultimately is the truth about us. We begin to be in that space, in that place where we truly understand what it means to say, all is well. We find within us that space and that place that is permanent, that is eternal, that is infinite, that is God in me and God in you. And when we do that, when we touch that, we are able to truly know what namaste is. The divine in me. It greets and it salutes the divine in me. You are magnificent. You are light. You are love.